So this is our first year of a 3-year project through the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, and this is winter grazing of goats, just to show and demonstrate the pluses and minuses of having electronet fence up on a 23-acre parcel, trying to keep animals in a winter situation out on the land. And we're demonstrating taking data on their shelters as far as data loggers inside their shelter to show what kind of temperatures we have inside the shelter versus outside. Also keeping track of how much hay we're feeding them and how we're feeding them, whether we're feeding them in a feeder, or if we're spreading the hay out on the ground or tucking the hay up into some of the brush. And just trying to demonstrate what type of job they do on the plants in the wintertime, as far as how well they eat some of the bark, or what particular species they go after in the wintertime versus the summertime in the normal grazing season. So we're just about to come to an end. It's about March 9th, 2017, and it's these goats are getting ready to move to their next project. So they've been in here since last fall. Right around that November time frame is when we first started to bring some of these goats out on this property, and it's been what we consider a real great success for the first year. We had no escapes in with the electronet and the snow and everything. One important point to point out is that these animals were trained to electronet fence, and so they're kind of used to it. It wasn't like we just put them in there right in the wintertime without any training, so they're used to the fence. Also notice they really didn't even challenge the fence. There were definitely some times when the snow got a little deep and we got a little, didn't have quite the voltages that we'd like to see, and we weren't seeing the goats going near them at all. We also installed game cameras that took a picture kind of the field every hour, just to kind of document how often the goats were going out and working in the brush, as opposed to how often they were hanging out by the feeders and by the hay feeders. And really trying to learn the balance about how much to feed them and how to feed them, because they definitely would get lazy or kind of annoying by kind of sticking up by the hay feeders. When we started to move the hay around and made them work for their food a little bit, got much better goat coverage on the property. So we would feed them in a particular location, and then a couple weeks later we'd start to kind of spread it around. And probably next winter we'll probably work on the opposite side versus this side, since this is a 3-year project. I would say, you can see these goats are still working here. Some of them have started to move out in the fields, but some of the tender grass is just starting to pop through, so some of these are kind of taking advantage of that. But the bulk majority of the winter, it's been all browse, whether it's small twigs and stems or the bark of trees here for them. That's been accessible because of the snow cover. So really happy how the coverage that we got. If I had to estimate on how much brush they were able to girdle, I would say anywhere in the neighborhood of 60 to 70% of kind of the brush, invasive brush that we wanted them to go after. So we still have 2 more seasons here, and these goats are learning from each other on how to strip bark and how to be better browsers. So I only expect better results in the future. So this area is all solid buckthorn, thick as 6-inch diameter trunks, and you can see how they're coming and girdling the bark off of these taller ones. So what I like to do, come in and kind of cut an area, or just stand in an area, but as you can see, they all catch on pretty quick here. And sometimes we'll cut down some other brush so they can eat the tender tips of them, the buckthorn brush there. But the main goal is to keep them girdling the bark. So I just want to show on this area, we have a fence that was put right through this draw here. It was primarily prickly ash and still is primarily prickly ash, but you just can see the one side of the fence that they weren't able to reach, how thick it is. And then you scroll to the side we're on now. They had the exact same density, and you can see just the difference. So while they're starting to girdle, this is kind of the back side of the pen. They will eventually girdle these all, but the substantial amount of branches and top twigs that they've taken from this stand right here. Just much more open, easier to get in there and work, and it's just a cool thing to see. All right, this is another plant I'm super excited about, is the honeysuckle. invasive bush. And in the summertime, yes, they'll graze them. I've never seen them strip bark in the summer, but this winter, this entire paddock area, they're just hammering the honeysuckle. So notice all that bright wood there, all that bark, and the majority of the bark has been stripped off of this. And as far as you can see in the distance, I mean, everywhere you look, we got box elder, we've got dogwood, we got sumac, especially the ones out in the open that are encroaching on the grassland and prairie. Those are ones that get hammered first, and then they kind of work their way into the thicker woodland areas here. But this, I believe, was the way that a big portion of how the land was once managed. It wasn't necessarily just fire. I believe really strongly with my heart that it was animals in the wintertime, like this late fall, early spring, before a lot of stuff's greening up, just walking through, working these hillsides, and these little trees that are starting to pop up out in the prairie, out in the grassland. They're just like a beacon to draw the goats or elk or whatever animal it was at that time to just strip the bark. And they're basically not as protected as if they were in a woodland situation. So I really excited about this, and just to see this in action has been great. Another plant I wanted to point out for an observation would be the goldenrod. So this whole area is really thick in goldenrod. And before we came in here last fall, tons of seed heads everywhere you looked. But over the course of the winter, and even last fall, they went around and ate all the seed heads off. You can just see some of the worm bulbs still on here. But basically just pointing out how they went in and just took a lot of the seed of the goldenrod away, because there's a lot of game managers that really trying to get some of the goldenrod, which gets a little too aggressive on certain sites, and get a little bit more diversity. So I believe, and let's see as this study progresses next year and the following year for this 3-year study, if we start to see a little bit less goldenrod, just because we're kind of helping destroy some of the seed cycle. So that goat scratching its horn, that's why I'm a big advocate for leaving horns on goats and not having dehorned goats, but they use that to help scuff up the bark and to help them strip it off the tree easier. This is just another little area. This is solid buckthorn here, just cutting, kind of punched a little hole in there and letting some of that fall, so they got some access to some of the taller ones there. Just a lot of different things, a lot of different scenarios going on. And again, you can see all the honeysuckle, almost any honeysuckle that you see in this pen here, girdled down there, just everywhere you look, honeysuckle. It's getting really pounded by the goats. All right, now we're in one of the thicker areas right along wetland habitat, and you can see in the back here some really tall 20-25 foot buckthorn, again girdled, bark chewed and stripped off, some of those taller ones. But then off to this side here, you can just see the kind of the rolling hills. We've got some cottonwoods and some other trees. So we're in a wetter situation here, and that's what I really like in the wintertime, is these goats are able to walk out on that ice, out on that wetland area, and get some of those buckthorn out there, some of the dogwoods that maybe are getting a little thick, honeysuckle. And then this is an area that even in the cold times of the year, if you drive with heavy machinery, you're still going to rut it up. You're still going to potentially get sinked or get caught or get stuck out in some of these marshier areas. So just really neat to see that these goats are able to work in these areas, especially in the wintertime. You can see some of these, it's like gerbil there is chewing on some dogwood branches, and they're just kind of keep working their way through. So you just not notice, no matter, the goats are following us as we walk around and do this video. Wherever we're at, they're finding something to eat. You know, Jack's over there chewing on some bark. It's just they're really good at just kind of finding what to eat in any given situation. Here we have the energizer that we use to power the electronet system over the wintertime. And we put a double unit. It's a plug-in unit. There's 2 of them in here. We actually ended up only running 1. Hooked into here, the grounding, and kept track of the voltage all year long. And there's certain times when the voltage would drop, and certain times like right now we're all up, I think we're up to over 5,000 volts again, so after the snow melt. But even before the snow melt and during the snow melt, we were doing pretty good. And we found that even though the fence voltage was now down, we never had any escapes. We had approximately 150 goats in here all winter long, not a single escape, and just keeping them happy more in the middle of the enclosure, and then the ability for them to kind of go out and work in the brush has been really critical. So what we have here are the shelters that we're experimenting with for the winter grazing grant. So we really like these polydome calf hutches. Right here we have two different sizes. This is a full dome, and then this one right here is a smaller, kind of a half dome. What we like about them is you can adjust the ventilation and then easily to slide and move around on the landscape, so we're not burning one area out. And along with the shelters, we also put a couple thick bedding areas here, and you can see some of these goats that are sitting out in the sun, because we notice that a lot of times they like to be sitting outside, especially on those sunnier days, and some goats seem to prefer to be outside, so we give them that option as well. The coldest morning I remember this year is about 29 degrees below zero, and you can definitely see some of them packing into these huts. They'd fit, I would say, about 10 animals or so. Some of the bigger huts, maybe 6 to 8 for the smaller ones. And you could, even when you went in there, you could just really feel the heat from that. And the color of these also helps absorb the sun and get a little bit of solar heating. But then as part of the grant here, we put data loggers inside here, and I'll show you that right here, up underneath in this chimney here. You can kind of see up in there. See that little thing dangling there? So yeah, that's recording the temperature, the high and low, and the humidity. And here's one of the water tanks. So we would come out, bust ice. Depending on the thickness, take some of the ice out, or we'd haul water in. We also have a natural creek that comes through here, and we're trying to teach them and get them going on that. Didn't really try too much this year to experiment with them just strictly eating snow. We just kind of wanted to start high, and then see next year potentially maybe we'll try to see if we can get them on snow, or to teach them to drink out of the creek a little bit more. So this is a natural stream area that ran all winter long. It froze hard, pretty solid at times, but we're still able to chip holes open. So we're still experimenting with this. Want to expand on this a little bit more next year. Had a good number of the animals that would come and use this stream, and just trying to find ways to cut back on using or hauling water. And then also the fence here, even though it was partially submerged at times, it does definitely it lessens the voltage, but we were still able to keep some pretty decent voltages despite being in the water. But next winter, definitely going to shore up some of these areas a little bit more, bringing them up a little higher here, so we can don't have to try to mess with it in the wintertime. Even though we can still set fence in the winter, we use drill bits to install the pegs, and it worked great. So what we have here is a nice easy buckthorn feeder. So when there was snow on the ground and we were putting up some hay to kind of supplement them, this worked really nice. This was kind of a bushier buckthorn, and we just took the skid loader and stuck some of these hay chunks right in the buckthorn. As you can see, they also start to chew the bark here, and this one's got berries. But just a way to get the hay up off the ground in case we get a really heavy snowfall, that they still kind of had access to some hay while it was above when we're doing some supplemental feeding. This is a pond liner that we put over a hay pile right before a snowstorm, just to kind of cover the hay up, and so we can kind of peel it back if we get a heavier snowfall. And then we've got areas where we're just trying to put hay kind of right on the ground. We have areas with hay and a feeder, hay and trees, just all different applications to see what works best, what has the least amount of waste, and is the easiest for us to do. So what we have in the background here is some, I would say, mid-quality to low-quality hay. It's got a lot of weed seeds and whatnot in it, and this is spread out evenly as best we could, unrolled it out on the ground, and then the goats kind of spread out and eat as they need to. and we find that they'll still dig in the snow a little bit to get some of the hay. And then after it kind of melts again, we've actually put this down before the last snowstorm. We had about 12 inches of snow, and this melted again, and now they're going back at it and eating it again. All right, what we have here are some Christmas trees. We had a Christmas tree recycling program that was very successful this year. I think in all we had approximately 200 Christmas trees that we fed to the herd here, and it provided a nice treat for them. Some trees they would just eat the needles off, some they'd eat more of the tender twigs, and some of them they would strip the bark, but it just kind of gave them a nice little nutrient supplement right around January time when people are, right after Christmas when people are dumping their trees. So we got those scattered out throughout. So the pen I'm standing in we called pen number 4. We separated our goats into different classes. So this pen here primarily had younger kids or yearling kids, the smaller ones that were kind of getting bumped on around on the feeders. So this particular pen had a hay feeder up off the ground. That particular one's made by VK boars. So we put round bales in there. We would put small square bales in there, offered them plenty of Christmas trees. And then on the hillside there, they only really needed just one shelter because it was kind of a smaller group of them. So I'd say anywhere from 10 to 15 of them hung out here during the winter in pen number 4. So this pen we called pen number 3. This had a big bulk majority of our goats, adult goats. Some of the pens we were still doing some breeding with. So on this side over here we have 2 of the VK boar feeders again here, keeping them off the ground. And we would pull these back, kind of scrape out a couple times during the winter with some of the hay. And the big thing to note with this pen here is that they also had access, and the bulk majority of the herd could constantly go back out that gate and out into the other 23 acres of poly-knit fencing. So they had the ability to come up here and eat hay, or the ability to go out and browse out on the acreage. We're now in pen number 2. And this was another adult pen that had a different buck, so one of our breeding pens. But this pen in particular just had the one feeder. But on here I just wanted to highlight, we used these foam sheets, 4x8 sheets, as a wind blocker. So the nice thing, and one reason we chose this site, it's kind of in a valley. We're protected by some trees around here. But just watching from the different snow drifting, that there's a little bit more wind coming through here, so we put some of these up. And also, since this was a common fence between 2 different bucks, they were kind of trying to fight through the fence and stick their head through, so this having this visual barrier here to kind of block them off helped. So now we're in pen number 1, and then just showing another area. So this stayed up pretty well all winter. Then we had the spring melt, and now we froze hard again. Tornadoes the other day in Minnesota, and now it's freezing. So this fence is just kind of there's another fence here, so this is not keeping the goats in, but just going to show that you just really got to watch your water areas here, because when they flood in the spring. And our plan was initially just to bump this fence back out right along the edge of the road, but this small corner here we left off. But as you can see, when things were frozen in the fall and the winter time, they're still out to be able to get out and access some of this brush that they normally wouldn't be able to access in the summertime because they wouldn't go out in the water. But they were able to get a really nice coverage, really nice girdling on some of this buckthorn here, and it just gives them a much more greater area that they can cover in the winter. So over here, to recap, we had the hard panel area. This is kind of the intensive feeding ground, had the cattle panels with T-posts. This is also the plan to have that was in case we had a problem with E-net or the electricity not giving good voltage, that we could always put them in there while we were working on it. Didn't have any problems with the fence, but we found as we were coming out of winter, getting a lot of hay and waste built up there, we just brought them out here, put up a poly net, basically cut them off, and then we started to move the feeders out around the prairie here, and actually went back to just stuffing them naturally in crevices or spreading it out on the ground, really kind of opening it up wide so we don't have as much competition. And the whole goal here is, with this whole project for me, is to be able to take all this stuff down This summer, it's gonna all, there's gonna be no shelters, no fencing here. It all can grow back and look like a natural, nice prairie. So in the wintertime, we're not just burning it out, and so that the grass still has a chance to grow back up through and look like a real nice prairie grassland situation. And here we have one of the few protected buckthorn plants in this whole property. This cage was put on by Landscape Restorations, and a part of the part of this grant was to evaluate different caging methods to see how well we could keep the goats off particular plants. So we know that they love buckthorn in this paddock. So this is one of the fence caging systems. This is actually, looks like number 7 buckthorn. And as you can see, despite heavy pressure everywhere else, seems to have held them off. They did get up here and eat some of the twigs around the top, but they haven't gotten to the bark. So this is one example, and we have many different examples we'll show here of other types of methods that we tried. Here's a little closer example of the data loggers that we use. This is actually one of our control A, hanging in the tree outside of the shelters, so we can kind of keep track of the temperature from this compared to the temperature in the shelters and see if there's much difference. And we just kind of put an extra plastic and rubber around that just to kind of keep it a little bit more sealed from the elements and kind of keep the goats off of them. We did have it lower, but as you can see, the goats really worked and girdled this tree, so we kind of had to move it up a little bit in the tree. So here we have another example of a protectant that we tried that Landscape Restorations put on. So this is Nanny Berry number 3 with just a wrap. And I did provide some protection, although I was actually here to witness the goat that used its horns to kind of rub up and down, and then I peeled it up and was able to start to kind of access this. So I wouldn't say this is a complete failure, a complete success, but I gave some protection. But the cage method so far seems to, in this first year, seems to be the most effective, which we kind of would expect. I just want to draw your attention to this red osier dogwood. It used to be a big, huge, massive bush, and although a native, it's encroaching out on our grassland prairie. But just look at the beautiful work they did here. Again, all that bare wood, stripping all the bark off. And then you see that one there in the distance, this one, that one, that one. This is one of the first things, and a lot of times you just kind of follow the habits of wild deer. Really like to eat the tender shoots, and then just the ability for them to strip the bark and all the way up the straw, where we start to get some of the poplar, some of the ash seedlings that are coming up here, and as they're starting to work on those as well. This hillside is what I call the sumac massacre hillside. This really makes me excited every time I drive by and look at it. Just look at the attention to detail, how they strip the bark off of this sumac, almost like sculptors. And I find they'll come through, say they strip the bark 6 inches or so around, and then they'll come back and then they'll just keep stripping it more and more throughout the winter. So this sumac here is not going to be coming back above the point where it's been girdled. Not to say there's still not energy reserves in the ground, but just how low impact this wasn't a grinder, wasn't a shredder, wasn't a fire. And we just effectively kind of knocked this brush back while still preserving the grasses and forbs below. It's beautiful to see. An example of a cedar tree. There's not many cedars in this paddock, but you can see how they've eaten them about as far as they can reach and started to strip the bark on them as well in the wintertime. All right, we'll see if we can create a little goat swarm frenzy. Try just starting up. I like to use an electric chainsaw just because it's a little bit quieter between cuts. And one thing we notice is that they really love to eat buckthorn berries. And it's just really good to get them down, and I'd like to find out the nutritional value for them, but they love them. So notice how they first really go for the berries and then they're eating the tender tips. And they come running. I also point out that many of these are out in their 3rd trimester of pregnancy, so they're and still doing great. We have, knock on wood, have not had any problems with abortions or any health issues this year. So again, another taller buckthorn. These goats are getting ready to be moved out to another project. This is actually a 3-year project that we have here, so we have some time, but just for demonstration purposes, I'm going to cut this buckthorn down as well. See a lot of the berries. We got Oreo here working on it already, but if I would leave it, they would definitely come and eventually girdle this, so I probably wouldn't even need to cut it down. But just the fact that there's so many copious amounts of berries on it, I just want to cut it down, let their digestive gut destroy some of them so we don't have as many of them dropping to the ground. Timber! Here, guys. And I like to let them, I cut them up and then I let them stomp all over it, pull on it, smash it up before, and ideally I'd like to leave that branch before I stack it, if I do stack it, at least a year or 2 to dry up, and then it's a lot easier to drag around and pile up. And they're also taking a substantial amount of the brush away from the branch by eating it. Just got to be really handy with the chainsaw. Got to be careful when they're all climbing around you, so that's why we only cut around the goats, just to make sure nobody gets cut, because as you can see, they can swarm pretty quick. So here's an example of a couple of buckthorn I believe I cut down yesterday. But again, when they're on their side, I think it also helps. So I have a lot of smaller animals in here too, and I think it's easier for them to run their teeth down and girdle and strip the bark off of some of them when they're in the horizontal position versus vertical. They'll still obviously work in the vertical position, but this pen here, we're already getting ready to move, so I don't mind cutting this down. But typically you wouldn't want to do this, because if you're working and time is money, because once this is cut down, there's really no advantage of them stripping the bark off of this part that's already been cut off. But just really trying to keep these ones healthy. Again, we have a lot of pregnant females in here. Just want to give them a lot of access. I would really love to be able to find a forage sample or a tester that would take some of these samples and find out exactly what they're getting from this nice green bark from the buckthorn. So if anybody knows of a source or watches this video, please contact me and help me figure that out. But in terms of what I care about so far, the goats love it. They're doing good on it, and that's all that matters. But it would be nice to kind of get some numbers to justify or back up some of these claims. This is my buddy Merlin. So one of the quarter horses that's mixed in with the goats. They like to run around and chase them, but he's just picking a nice sunny slope here, sitting back and relaxing. But I like the mixture of horses and goats, so the goats work on the brush and then the horses are working more on the grass. Another thing I really like about this method is that the animals just seem much more happier, just relaxed, chill, just out on the out in the wild here. Just watching the horses when I let them out here, I'll kick their heels up and they're able to roll and find dust baths versus being in a dry lot. And the same thing with the goats. You know, I find that their hooves are much healthier since they're not standing in, in wet areas or wet bedding. Just the more we can just spread animals out on the landscape and not concentrate them. Just looking back and reflecting on our business so far, it seems like any time that we congregate them or in the wintertime is when we have problems. Never really have much problem in the summertime or spring when they're out on their grazing projects. So really excited about this new winter grazing aspect, getting them out on the land, spreading them out, letting them get really good exercise, and overall happier and healthier goats. This is baby Eden here, one of the originals. Loves a good back scratch. And it's just really good to see them being happy, healthy, working out on the land. Just kind of imagining that this was once buffalo and elk and kind of historically roaming our prairies and grasslands, but now in the new world we have goats, horses in the distance, everyone peacefully working out here. The goats definitely working on the brush and the more invasive type vines, raspberries, that type of stuff. But that's what I love about goats. They'll come out here, say they'll pick at the grass for a little bit, then they'll go over and girdle buckthorn for a while, then they'll go girdle a honeysuckle, girdle a sumac, go lay down, come back out, and just constantly moving around and getting a nice varied diet. So we're getting really good coverage on a lot of different species here. Almost all the grasses and forbs are all still dormant, so they're not being impacted. We have this nice fertilizer in the form of manure BBs that they're passing and spreading out, so that's just going to give extra nutrients for the grassland and the prairie to really take off. It's just very relaxing for me. Sit out, just watch animals grazing. Notice how they're nice and quiet. They're not bellowing out for help or that they're hungry.